So last weekend, Mila and I ended in Europe attending a family function. It was a long weekend. And on Tuesday night, we took that wonderful, inexpensive Norwegian Air that lands just down the road at Stewart from Edinburgh. And I found myself reflecting, crossing the Atlantic, that it was actually 35 years ago, almost to the week, that I made that crossing to leave my old life in Britain and to come and live in the United States. And it was what I talk about, the spiral moment. You get a sense that your life is not a line, but your life is a spiral. And for me, every 7 years, often there are moments with people or places reconnecting that you realize that your life is moving, and even though there's a familiarity in being in a plane crossing the Atlantic and remembering, to use the words of St. Paul, the heart is enlightened. There's a kind of moment, aha moment. Here we are again. This is an old story, but there's a new insight. And so, 35 years, that's 5 spirals ago in my life. And coming home and spending time with family and deep friends. And those of you, I'm sure, the Thanksgiving experience is a spiral moment where you're sitting around the table with family and friends and you're connecting and people are missing, and you may feel you're in the place you want to be, or you may feel you're not in the place you want to be. And there's a kind of judgment that's in that experience as well. And the judgment is obviously in our readings today. There's a kind of sense that the church is helping us to reflect on the spiral of the church year, that we're coming. Today is a kind of a full stop. Today's actually the end of the Christian year. And next week, Advent, 4 Sundays, a time of preparation to celebrate love incarnate. And what's wonderful about Advent is that it's not commercialized. We don't have the Advent sales. Yet. There's an entrepreneur for you. And so it's kind of pure that we can actually, as this spiral goes on in our lives, we can use that time to kind of unplug and unclutter. And next week, we will be lighting the first Advent candle and asking for the Spirit of God as we journey towards Bethlehem to kind of slow down and to be present and to, cease the anxiety and the fear and the judgment that we often bring at this time of year. There's a lot of judgment. Maybe you feel bad you ate too much on Thursday. Or you're not in the place, a deeper judgment, that you're not in the place where you want to be or you hope to be. And we're hard on ourselves. We beat ourselves up. And that's a part of the readings today that I want to try and unpack. I want to start with the Ezekiel reading. And Ezekiel lives about 600 years. That's 80 spirals, using my 7-year, 80 spirals before Jesus. And here again, this story is coming around again, and it's given a whole new meaning in Jesus. For Ezekiel, he is clergy. He is a priest in the temple. He loses his wife. He sees his community destroyed, sent into exile. And so he is ranting and raving about what he sees and what he remembers and what is now present. And then he talks about a different age, a future age, where the political leadership, and when the Old Testament is talking about the shepherds of Israel, they're specifically talking about political leaders. And when so it's not a pastoral model, it's a political model. And the political model is about that the leaders have neglected their responsibility to take care of the people. They have divided rather than to unite. They have scattered. They have squandered. They have not taken care of the vulnerable. And because of that, there is destruction. And so Ezekiel's vision is about this golden age when everybody will be taken care of. Everybody will be welcome at the table. Anxiety and fear will be no more. And somehow, we're caught in that. It's interesting, the Feast of Christ the King was created by Pope Pius XI in 1925. It's a very recent feast, but it was during a year of Jubilee, when debts were forgiven, when peace and prosperity was prayed for around the world. The following year we had the Great Crash and the Depression. But that image of Jubilee and freedom from want and freedom from fear, we're caught in the spiral between those two places. So Ezekiel's vision is an important vision, and that vision fuels the preparation for the coming of Jesus. And Jesus is seen as the shepherd, the person, the leader who is going to take care of the people. And in the Matthew reading, it's very judgmental. This is a very harsh, judgmental piece of scripture that I want to look at. And it's just before the next chapter, Jesus is arrested and is charged and is crucified. We know what happened. So these are his final words to his disciples before he is killed. And it's about taking, if you're a leader, and what the church is saying, that Christ our King, the model that we take of leadership is about the servant leader who looks out for the vulnerable. And that's the only measure. If you're Christian, you can't apply the corporate model. You can't apply the social Darwinism, rugged individualism. You can't. The model, what the church is saying, when Christ is the King, Christ is our leader. And when we are called into leadership, that we have to gather, we have to invite all at the table, we have to take care of the vulnerable. And that's how we are measured, that's how we are judged, if we do that or not. So, difficult texts. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the film Bowling for Columbine by Michael Moore. And in the film, he contrasts the North American culture of Canada and the United States. And he has this theory, and it's an intriguing theory, that our preoccupation with arms and protecting ourselves comes from a deep neurosis or anxiety. We don't trust the universe. We don't trust God. We don't trust each other. We lock our doors. We live in walled communities. We invest heavily in guns and armaments to help us feel safe. But with all of this, we still really don't feel safe. And this culture permeates, this culture of anxiety and judgment permeates our life. Children are guarded and chauffeured from one activity to the next. So we reinforce and we pass on to our children this kind of cultural mistrust that has profound spiritual consequences. It's a kind of national spiritual sabotage that if we don't really think we can trust. And so we're caught between, especially this week where we've just celebrated Thanksgiving, it is a unique American feast where everybody is welcome at the table. And it's an interracial celebration. When we think about the Native American and the Europeans who first had the first Thanksgiving, that is the kind of basis of what we're doing. And yet, how do we deal with this anxiety and this judgment that is around? I remember a parishioner when I was working in St. George's in California, and he had this spiritual practice for years. And it was a way of, he dealt with his anxiety. So what he did was every morning he set aside 15 minutes where he would just spend 15 minutes worrying. And so in the rest of the day, when anxiety would come up, he'd go, "Be gone, I'll talk to you in the morning." He was a Scotsman. And he found that was a really helpful way to kind of recognize a kind of mindfulness of this anxiousness and a judgment that he had about himself. And then he found that as he would spend 15 minutes in the morning looking at his anxiety, he didn't have enough to worry about. And he sort of contained it and faced it. And that was a wonderful practice that John had. It reminds me, Joan Chichester, of the Benedictine tradition. She's a former nun. She says, "Hospitality is the way we come out of ourselves. It is the first step of dismantling the barriers of the world. Hospitality is the way we turn a prejudiced world around one heart at a time." The other story I wanted to share with you in terms of judgment, and I'm reminded of that wonderful poem that begins, "Love bade me welcome, but my soul drew back." And it's a conversation between a person and God. And then God kind of argues with the person, "Well, I love you. Didn't I make you? Didn't I make you the way you are?" And in the end, the person realizes that God is inviting this person to the table, "So I did come and eat." But it was an interesting kind of process of self-judgment that you were unworthy, a kind of sense of guilt. I remember, I've told some of you this story, but my mother was brought up in a very evangelical tradition. She belonged to the Church of the Nazarene. It's very fundamentalist. And she attended it as a teenager. Then she said, "Well, then I met your father and I married the devil. And I left the church." She was joking, I think. But when I was ordained and I would celebrate the Eucharist, my mother would never come forward. And I said to her, what's going on? Come, you're welcome at the table. Wherever you are in your journey of faith, you're welcome. She said, "No, I don't feel worthy." And there was some text about eating and drinking to your own damnation that was kind of pulled out of St. Paul, which was completely out of context. But it held her back. Love bade me welcome, but my soul drew back. And I said to her, "Look, Mother, without you, there would be no celebration today. Your son is the celebrant." And the eyes of the heart were enlightened, and she started coming. And that's a kind of modern way that I'm talking about. How do we? This is the ending of a year, and Advent is this wonderful invitation to begin anew and to start afresh. The other part of the story I wanted to share with you is this sense of guilt that many of us struggle with. And it might be guilt that we are so wealthy and everybody around us is not. Or we're just not good enough and we feel that we're not measuring up to what it means to be a Christian or a leader or whatever in the world. And I remember in the 1980s, when we were going through the AIDS crisis, many of my contemporaries were infected and died. People that I loved and cared for, and there was this, it was almost like being in a war, right? And those of us who survived had enormous guilt. We call it survivor's guilt. And it's about we're all in the same plane, and the plane has crashed, and some people are killed and others walk away. Why is that? And so I struggled with this. And many of us, we put that energy, a lot of the gospel about feeding and clothing and visiting and all that stuff we did, and many of you did, but there was still this guilt that I had to deal with it kind of in my soul. And I read this book called Necessary Losses by a woman called Judith Viorst. And the book, the premise of the book was basically that to grow as a human being, you have to go through loss. There are things that are taken away from you right from the moment you're born. And that's how life is. And through that loss, guess what? We are born into a world. We grow, we develop, we contribute, we learn. And that doesn't end at the end of life. That continues. But there was a page in the book, I remember reading this book, and it was a fascinating book. But she said, there was one chapter where she talks about guilt. And she said, it is easier to feel guilty than to feel powerless. It is easier to feel guilty than to feel powerless. And again, it was a kind of moment of the enlightening of the heart. And that what I was struggling with was not about the guilt of my own survival, but it was my own powerlessness that I couldn't look at. Right? And so, as we look at the judgment and the theme of today as this period ends and a new opportunity, a new year, a new beginning flashes, is lighting up beside us, to think about judgment and guilt in a different way. What is it hiding? What is it that's underneath that, this veneer that we're really struggling with, that our hearts may be enlightened? And we are blessed. We are surrounded with all we possibly need, the people, the community of Jesus. We are seeing the bigger picture. We are moving into a different relationship with one another. We are dealing with the personal sabotage that is healed within the community of Jesus, the place of unconditional love, and the balance of giving and sharing. We had a service here on Thanksgiving Day, and it was wonderful to think about all of the families, all of the blessing that St. Peter's has shared with hundreds of people in our community, that Thanksgiving was different this year as the community of Jesus, to welcome the strangers. And so we relish the moment on this planet. We become aware of where we are in the spiral of our lives and in our life together. And so the model of our leadership as disciples of the King, to be shepherds, to be good shepherds, to serve him through hospitality and welcome to the least of these, our brothers and sisters. So I hope that this moment of preparation as we prepare for Advent, new beginnings, new year, it's an old story, but we want to hear it differently maybe this year. We want to be open to hearing it differently. O come, Emmanuel. And that somehow the anxiety and the guilt and the fear is melted in the embrace, and the eyes of the heart are enlightened. Amen.